鹿児島県の奄美大島で駆除が行われてきたマングースについて、環境省が根絶宣言を発表しました。
In 1979, Japan thought it had found the perfect fix for a serious snake problem. People were getting bitten by venomous snakes, and some were dying, so something had to be done quickly. The plan was to bring in snake hunters, small, furry animals that seemed made to take down deadly snakes. It sounded smart, the science backed it up, and folks were hopeful this natural solution would work. But 25 years later, everything went sideways. What started as a plan to save lives turned into one of the worst wildlife disasters in Japan's history. The snake hunters did their job, but not in the way anyone had expected, and the island was changed forever. The deadly problem that started it all. Amamyoshima Island in Japan, known for its lush green forests, used to be stalked by a dangerous threat, the habu snake. This wasn't just any snake. The habu is one of Japan's most venomous, known for being aggressive and striking without warning. In 1980 alone, around 400 people were bitten by habu snakes. Sadly, some of them didn't survive and never made it back to their families. This wasn't just a scary story, it was part of everyday life. People lived with the fear constantly. The habu comes from the same family as rattlesnakes and puff adders. Its venom is just as dangerous as that of cobras or coral snakes, fast, deadly, and nearly impossible to predict. With snakes like this showing up out of nowhere, the island stopped feeling safe. What made things worse was the lack of proper medical help. There was an antidote for the venom, but it had to be kept cold to work. Most bites happened in the island's remote, rural areas, places without steady electricity or working refrigerators. That meant the medicine didn't always make it to the people who needed it in time. Even with doctors doing their best, it often wasn't enough. With more people getting hurt, fear spreading, and not enough medical resources to go around, the Japanese government knew they had to act. Building hospitals or running power lines into the far corners of the island would take years and a lot of money. Creating a new antidote that didn't need refrigeration wasn't possible yet either. Not with the technology they had back then. That's when someone had a bold idea. Instead of relying only on medicine or building projects, why not let nature help out? They started looking for a predator, a natural enemy of the habu. It had to be able to survive the venom, hunt the snakes, and live well on the island without causing other problems. And it seemed like they had found the perfect animal. The perfect snake killer. The small Asian mongoose was seen as the ideal solution to Japan's growing snake crisis. This fast, meat-eating mammal seemed to have everything needed to take on the job. It was quick, tough, and had already shown it could handle dangerous snakes in other countries. The mongoose looked like the perfect natural answer to Japan's urgent snake problem. For many people, it felt like a smart, no-nonsense solution to something that had gone on for too long. One of the mongoose's biggest strengths was how fast and nimble it was. People often described it as moving like lightning, able to dodge and strike back before a snake could even react. It had already proven itself by fighting cobras in South Asia, which are close relatives of the habu. Watching one in action was like watching a pro boxer, dipping, weaving, and striking with sharp, practiced moves. Even more amazing, mongooses have a natural resistance to snake venom. Special receptors in their bodies help block the dangerous effects of the toxins that would kill most animals. It's like they've got an invisible shield, giving them the upper hand in snake fights. This rare trait let them survive bites that would be deadly to just about anything else. Over time, mongooses had developed into expert snake hunters. In countries like India, Nepal, and Pakistan, they'd been helping control snake populations for ages. Brave and experienced, they earned a solid reputation for being tough opponents to venomous snakes. On paper, the mongoose checked every box. It made sense from a nature and budget point of view. So, in 1979, the Japanese government gave the plan a green light. They brought mongooses over to Amami-Oshima Island, choosing and transporting them carefully for one clear goal: to cut down the habu snake numbers. There was even a bonus. Local farmers had been struggling with rats ruining their crops, and officials hoped the mongooses could help with that too. At first glance, the idea seemed both smart and simple. Let the mongooses loose, let them hunt the snakes, and slowly bring the island back to a safe, balanced place. Using nature to fight nature seemed like a clever and cheaper alternative to building hospitals or hauling refrigerated medicine across the island's rugged terrain. It was sold as a practical fix, one that could solve two major problems at once. The snakes didn't know what hit them. Their new enemy didn't fight like anything they'd ever seen. Quick, unpredictable, yet strangely coordinated. The idea of this furry little army working together captured people's imaginations. Most locals were on board. People living in fear for years finally felt a little hope. Government leaders supported it too, optimistic that this little creature would bring lasting peace to the island. The arrival of the mongooses felt like the beginning of a better, safer chapter. But theory doesn't always match reality. Once the plan was in motion, the mongooses arrived on Amami-Oshima, ready to do what they were brought there for. They were strong, eager, and had every natural skill needed to hunt down habu snakes. Everyone waited. Weeks passed, then months, then years. Something wasn't adding up. The mongooses were doing great on the island, but the habu snakes were still everywhere. The snake hunters weren't actually hunting snakes. That's when the first big flaw in the plan came into focus. Mongooses are daytime animals. They're up and active when the sun's out, sniffing around and looking for food. But habu snakes are the opposite. They only come out at night. So while the mongooses were settling in for sleep, the snakes were just getting started. And when the mongooses were out hunting in the daylight, the snakes were tucked away in their dens. The two animals were sharing the same island, but living on totally different schedules. But even if their timing had matched perfectly, there was another issue no one had really thought through. Snakes are tough to catch, they're fast, dangerous, and they fight back hard. Going after a snake takes a lot of energy and comes with real risk, even for a mongoose. Meanwhile, the island was filled with easy food. Mice ran everywhere, rabbits bounced through the fields, and birds nested low in the trees. For a hungry mongoose, it was like picking between a tricky, dangerous meal or a bunch of easy snacks. Unsurprisingly, the mongooses picked the safer route. Why fight a deadly habu snake when you could catch something harmless in half the time? By 1993, the problem couldn't be ignored anymore. The mongoose population had exploded. They'd started with just 30 animals, but now the island was full of them. The Ministry of Environment raised the alarm when estimates hit around 10,000 mongooses. They had completely failed at their original purpose, but they were incredibly good at reproducing. Now the island had two major problems. The snakes were still a threat, and now thousands of mongooses were running wild, eating everything in sight. And the worst part was still ahead. The unexpected victims. While everyone was busy worrying about the mongooses and the snakes, something worse was quietly unfolding. The mongooses had discovered that Amami-Oshima was like one big buffet, and they had no intention of stopping. The island wasn't just any patch of land. Amami-Oshima is a subtropical gem and a protected UNESCO World Heritage Site. That means it's home to rare and unique animals you won't find anywhere else on Earth. Many of these creatures had lived peacefully there for thousands of years with no natural predators. So when the mongooses showed up, it was a disaster. These local animals didn't know how to hide, run, or protect themselves. They'd never needed to before. The biggest victim of all was the Amami rabbit. These weren't ordinary rabbits. They're often called living fossils. They're the last of an ancient species of Asian rabbits that once lived across the mainland. Over time, their numbers shrank, and now they're only found on two small islands. These rabbits had made it through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and all kinds of natural disasters. But they couldn't survive the mongooses. These ancient animals, who had lived safely on the island for generations, suddenly found themselves being hunted by a predator they had never encountered before. The mongooses were brutal toward the Amami rabbits. Their numbers started falling quickly. These rabbits were the last of their kind on the island. Creatures that had managed to survive for millions of years were now on the edge of vanishing for good. The mongooses were wiping out a part of natural history that could never be brought back. But the rabbits weren't the only ones in danger. The mongooses also found the Amami spiny rats, another rare species found nowhere else on Earth. These small creatures had adapted perfectly to life on this island, but they were totally unprepared for a fast, aggressive predator. In just a few short years, around 15 unique species were seriously threatened because of the mongooses. The island's delicate balance, which had lasted for thousands of years, was falling apart. And it wasn't just animals. They were also eating bird eggs, making it nearly impossible for some bird species to survive. Every lost egg meant one less bird that would grow up to keep the cycle going. In just 2 decades, the habitat range for some small animals had shrunk by 40%. The snake hunters had turned into full-blown ecosystem wreckers, and things were getting worse by the day. The island under siege. By the early 2000s, Amami Oshima was facing a full-blown ecological crisis. The mongooses had taken over. What started out as a simple fix for a snake issue had turned into something no one had seen coming. The numbers were staggering. The mongoose population had exploded, from just 30 to more than 10,000 in 20 years. That's over 300 times what they started with. And every one of those animals needed to eat every single day. They weren't picky either. The island's unique and fragile ecosystem couldn't keep up. Islands are special places where animals evolve on their own, often creating rare species that don't exist anywhere else. But this also makes them vulnerable. These animals had no natural defense against outside predators. And now they were up against a relentless, fast-breeding invader. The mongooses were like a small army, tearing through anything they could catch: mammals, birds, reptiles, insects, eggs, even fruits. Nothing was off limits. Researchers began tracking the damage, and what they saw was heartbreaking. Amami rabbits, once common across the island, had become incredibly rare. The chances of spotting one of these ancient survivors in the wild had dropped drastically. The spiny rats were vanishing too. These animals had evolved slowly, over millions of years, to live in this one small place. But against the mongooses, they never stood a chance. Bird numbers were also falling fast. The forest, once full of life and sound, was growing quiet. As bird populations dropped, everything else started to shift. Birds help control insects and spread plant seeds. With fewer of them around, bugs were multiplying, and certain plants weren't able to grow like they used to. Local people began to understand the awful reality. The solution to their snake problem had made things worse, much worse. What was supposed to fix the island was now destroying it. The cure had become more dangerous than the disease, and the island's entire environment was paying the price. Something had to change, and fast. But trying to remove 10,000 mongooses from a large forested island? That was going to be anything but simple. The real fight was just beginning. In 2000, the Japanese government finally said out loud what everyone on Amami Oshima already knew: the mongoose project had completely backfired. What was supposed to be a fix for the snake problem had turned into a full-blown environmental disaster. The snake hunters had become destroyers, and the island's unique wildlife was now in real danger. It was time to act. The Ministry of Environment kicked off a serious effort to bring the mongoose population under control. But it wasn't going to be easy. By now, mongooses had spread all over the island. They were good at hiding and still breeding like crazy. The first efforts were simple. Officials placed basic traps along the roads, hoping to catch them as they moved around. But it didn't work well. The mongooses were clever. They avoided most of the traps. And even when a few were caught, it didn't make a dent. Their numbers were just too high for that approach to work. So the government stepped up their game. They switched to specially made traps just for mongooses. They used toxic bait and strong-smelling lures designed to attract them from a distance. They also brought in technology to help track their movements. Motion sensor cameras were placed across the island, and teams started using trained dogs that could sniff out mongooses from far away. All of this was expensive and required a lot of people. But the government wasn't backing down. They were committed to saving the island, no matter what it took. The turning point came in 2005 when the local community joined the fight. That's when a group called the Amami Mongoose Busters was formed. And despite the light-hearted name, this was serious work. The team was made up of local residents and trained wildlife experts who knew the forests better than anyone. Working together, they set up an unbelievable 30,000 traps all across the island. That number alone shows just how big the problem had become. These weren't easy traps to set. The work was tough, deep in the forest, through thick undergrowth, on steep trails, in blazing heat. Some areas were so remote it took hours of hiking just to reach them. But the effort started to show results. The traps began catching mongooses. The search dogs were finding dens that humans never would have spotted. Bit by bit, the mongoose numbers were starting to fall. The plan was working, but it was painfully slow, and every day that passed meant another risk for the rabbits, birds, and other struggling species. The long road to victory. The fight to get rid of the mongooses turned into a long, drawn-out battle. Year after year, the mongoose busters stuck with it, checking cameras, resetting traps, hiking through the dense forests. It was tiring, costly, and sometimes even risky, but they refused to give up. Catching 10,000 mongooses was never going to be quick. It took endless hours of steady, careful effort. Every single mongoose they caught brought them a step closer to giving the island its balance back. But no matter how many they found, there were always more hiding somewhere. Still, the numbers finally began to shift. From thousands, the population dropped to hundreds, and something amazing started to happen. The native animals began to return. Amami rabbits, once on the edge, slowly began to bounce back. With fewer mongooses chasing them, their numbers started to climb. Birds that had stopped nesting were now building nests again. Slowly but surely, life was coming back to the island. The island's ecosystem was slowly coming back to life. Locals started noticing the changes. More birds in the trees, rabbits in places they hadn't seen in years. But the mongoose busters knew their job wasn't over yet. If even a few mongooses remained, everything could fall apart again. They had to keep going until every last one was gone. So they did, day in, day out, for years. By 2015, mongoose sightings had become rare. The motion sensor cameras were going weeks without any sign of activity. The trained dogs struggled to pick up fresh mongoose scent. It felt like the end was finally within reach. But this last phase was the hardest. Finding the final few animals hiding somewhere in the dense forest took even more patience. The final victory. Then, in April 2018, something incredible happened. The very last mongoose was caught. After that, something even more amazing followed. Nothing. No more mongooses showed up in traps. No more photos on the cameras. The dogs couldn't sniff out a single one. The island had gone quiet in the best way possible. By 2024, experts felt confident enough to say it out loud. The mongooses were gone. For good. Based on all the tracking data and years of monitoring, the Japanese Ministry of Environment made it official. Amami Oshima Island was mongoose-free. It was a massive achievement.
本当にありがとうございます。おめでとうございます。
Experts say that in the entire world, there have only been 9 times where mongooses were fully removed after being introduced. Amami Oshima was the biggest island where it had ever been done. In total, around 32,000 mongooses were caught, more than 1,000 times the number that had originally been released. That shows just how quickly the population had grown and how out of control the problem had become. The program came with a huge price tag: traps, cameras, trained dogs, and the people doing the work, it all added up. But doing nothing would have cost far more. The entire ecosystem could have collapsed. Thanks to the nearly 20 years of hard work by the mongoose busters, setting 30,000 traps, reviewing hundreds of camera feeds, and searching every inch of forest, they saved it. This wasn't just about getting rid of a problem. It was about bringing the island back from the edge. Japan's Environment Minister, Ito Shintaro, said it best: success came from staying determined. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, but it worked. The victory on Amami Oshima has now become a guide for other places facing similar issues. The methods used here are now being shared with teams on other islands in Japan and even around the world. The lessons learned are helping others avoid the same mistakes. Lessons learned and new challenges. The mongoose removal was a major win, but it also came with a lesson that shouldn't be ignored. When humans introduce animals into places where they don't belong, the results can be unpredictable and sometimes deeply harmful. And what about the original snake problem that started it all? Well, that ended up being solved too, but not because of the mongooses. By 2020, snake bites from habu snakes had dropped to around 60 a year, and since 1992, not a single person had died from one. What changed? People became more careful, and the anti-venom became easier to access and use. In the end, the mongooses didn't help at all with the snakes. They failed at the job they were brought in to do, but succeeded in creating a much bigger challenge that took 25 years to fix. Now, the experience from Amami Oshima is being used to take on mongoose problems in other places, but it also shows just how important it is to act fast. The longer you wait to deal with an invasive species, the harder it is to undo the damage, especially when the species is as smart and stubborn as a mongoose. What do you think of this wild story? Have you ever heard of a plan that completely backfired like this? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.